Hey, Janice, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here.
You're very welcome. To introduce you to the audience, for anyone who doesn't know you, who do you say you are?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I'm a mom. I'm a mom and a recovering alcoholic. And not to get into my backstory too much, it took me a while to figure out that those were my main roles. But my background is I'm a social worker and I do a lot of educational speaking, some public speaking, because I wrote a book on how to repair relationships in recovery, which is the topic I'm most passionate about is breaking generational trauma and helping families heal after addiction, trauma, mental illness. So yeah, that's the short version.
Got you. How long have you been on this journey, recovery, and everything from like writing the book to going down this track to repair the relationships?
Yeah. Okay. So I hate to say this, but I like my own story. Um, I was born, no, just kidding. I grew up in an alcoholic home.
Hmm.
So, that kind of formed me as a young kid to grow up. I'm not sure how familiar you are with adult children of alcoholics, but our family was a nice family. We looked great from the outside, but we had that shadow of alcoholism. And I emerged from that family with all kinds of lovely traits that I spent a lot of time hiding and covering up, like being insecure and feeling over responsible and being afraid of authority figures. I knew that there's alcoholism on both sides of our family. So pretty early on, I knew that I should stay away from alcohol. Um, and also, I was really scared to death of my mom. So that was a big reason to not drink. I guess the biggest reason why I didn't drink as a young person, that was the fact that I was an athlete. And I approached my sport almost like an addiction.
Mm.
But because I put everything into it, I used it to mask my feelings, to build some self-esteem, yada, yada, yada. So, and that carried me for a long time. It carried me that and growing up in that family, being over responsible and caring so much about kids and families. I naturally went into social work and got a graduate degree, worked as a love research and writing and worked as a teaching assistant. And but my first jobs were in addiction treatment settings,
Mm.
working as the family therapist on that side, which is ironic. That time I drank socially, not very much. My
Hmm.
crutch again was probably I was a big distance runner. I transitioned from a distance swimmer to a distance runner.
Mm.
Um, so ironically, and I worked with families. That's always been my passion. It's still my passion. So I worked in that field and thrived in it actually. Did a lot of public speaking and things like that. Married my husband, and then took a less demanding part-time social work job and settled into married life, raising kids, at times being a stay-at-home mom, at times really frustrated with trying to juggle a career and parenting with a nice man, but a husband who traveled 3 or 4 nights a week. So I was essentially a single parent. And to make a long story short, all of those self-care skills that I had learned in school and in addiction treatment gradually slipped away because I lost my identity. I mean, I went from being a career woman
Hmm.
to a mom and really conflicted about that. Some of those messages from my childhood, and this is just a, for instance, stop me if I run on too much or ramble.
No, you're
But
fine.
like, so I grew up with a mom well, she did go. She started college when I went to college. I was the
Mm.
youngest of three kids, the only girl. Both my parents grew up on farms. Both of their parents were immigrants from Scandinavia. And from the outside looked like nice families, but from the inside had some very misogynistic traits. Men
Mm.
are smarter, better, stronger than women. Women stay in the house. And my mom rebelled about that a little bit. I'm getting to a point here, I swear. And she had this underlying motive to live out her life in me, like a lot of parents do,
Mm.
and really pushed me to get an education, to work hard, to make sure I could be independent, if something happened to my marriage, all of that. And so, like during the time periods where I would stay home or I took a part-time job that wasn't in my field, she put pressure on me. Like, I don't understand this. You have a master's degree. Why are you doing this? Do you know you're setting yourself up? What if your husband leaves you one day? You won't have worked. And that on top of with, I'm also of the culture, the just post feminist culture where everyone was saying women can have it all.
Mm.
You can, in fact, there's a silly commercial like where the woman kicks off her shoes, makes dinner for her man, and still takes a hot, bubbly bath. So I grew up with this like, you should be able to do it all, but I
Mm.
couldn't. And then, which I didn't address a whole lot, but some of those issues from my dysfunctional family, like low self-esteem, not being able to stick up for myself, people pleasing, um, feeling guilty when I did stand up for myself.
Mhm.
You know, uh, there was a point, and no disrespect to my husband, where he begged me to quit my job because of the demands on him and
Mm.
our family life when he's traveling and I'm working. I mean, he begged me. I had all this conflict in my head with my stuff, which is not a reason to start drinking. But that combined with the genetic factor of drinking,
Mm.
by not taking care of myself, using those self-care skills. Stepping back, I worked the last few years of my social work career like a full-time volunteer with a Christian service company, my kids' schools, still working in the field, but not paid.
Mhm.
And I started drinking
Mm.
as an escape, as a quick fix. And I'm going really long. So the short end of the story is I started drinking in my 40s. By 50, I was a full-blown alcoholic in full denial
Mhm.
and carrying a great deal of guilt and shame.
Mm.
The shame was as crippling as what the alcohol did to my body. And the biggest piece of shame was the damage I was doing to my kids. Because I'd grown up in a home like this
Mhm.
with a functioning alcoholic dad. And here I would call myself a functioning alcoholic because I drank mostly at night. I still got my kids to school. I still volunteered. I was the school nurse, so I was functioning from the outside. But
Mhm.
the guilt and shame was that I was doing to my kids exactly what my parents had done to me. And I swore I would never do that.
Mm.
I would never hurt them or put them in that situation. So eventually I went to treatment and I went thinking that I'd go for, I'm giving you the whole story now. For
Yeah.
4 weeks, I
Mhm.
stayed for 12 because once I got there, for the first time in my life, I was like, yeah, well, there is this sexual assault as an adult. I mean, I knew I walked into treatment with a lot of issues about grief and insecurity and not and having have lost my identity. But
Mm.
as I got there and was more comfortable, I was like, and things would come out in therapy, I'd be like, yeah, I was assaulted. And they'd be like, what? And that kind of falls back on the ACA stuff because in my head and as a social worker, I'm like, well, what I experienced isn't as bad as, the woman who's a victim of a house break-in. And you know what I mean?
Right, right. I follow you.
All of these things started evolving and coming up, and they were like, stay for more therapy. And I did. And here's where the book and my work now has evolved. While I was doing that, I was working on building sobriety skills, overcoming some of that childhood and young adult trauma.
Mhm.
Um, I was neglecting my family emotionally and mentally.
Mm.
And that is still tied in. This is kind of hard to explain, but it's still tied into because one of my four things as a child is fear of abandonment,
Hmm.
grief, loss. And my typical reaction, this is what I saw my parents do, is deny it, avoid it. So I knew when I went to treatment, it was a hardship on my family at home. I had four kids. They ranged in age from 13 to 21.
Hmm.
It was a lot of responsibility for my now ex-husband to try and juggle their after school activities and his job and everything. And I essentially neglected all that. I focused all my attention on myself, which is a common thing that we as alcoholics and addicts do when we get to recovery.
Hmm.
We replace our addiction to alcohol or drugs, and I'm being kind of dramatic here, but to recovery. And that's exactly what I did.
Do you
And
mind if I ask you a
yeah, to
question?
ask some questions.
So, kind of going back to when you spoke on what got you into alcoholism, like going from socially drinking to where it became something
Mhm.
more common. Like, do you remember kind of what made that switch?
I do. I have to say, back up and say, I think I always had an addictive personality. I just had socially acceptable addictions. For when
Mm.
I was young, it was sports, then it
Right,
was
right.
my career, then it was being super volunteer mom.
Hmm.
Um, so when I started drinking, I was like, I drank normally for 20 years. I can drink normally now. And it started very slow,
Hmm.
very gradual. But I think the big turning point where I can identify was summer of 2008, where both of my parents who live in Texas, I live in Alabama,
Hmm.
were hospitalized and in rehab. And I, being the only girl, was responsible for caring for them, making life and death decisions.
Hmm.
And at that time, in order to cope, I started drinking
Gotcha.
around the clock. I sat and drank. My dad had a brain injury, so he was very confused and wanted to get out of bed and pull tubes out. And I sat by his bed and sipped my little alcohol and Diet Coke all day.
Hmm.
And then I would go home at night. I just flashed. I probably drove buzzed.
Hmm.
Um, but I at least had the sense to go home at night to my parents' house, all alone, no family. Family at home who were like, when are you coming back? When are you coming back?
Right.
Pressure. Pressure from my brothers who are like, you know, someone's sick in the family, there's conflict.
Hmm.
Um, and I would go home and drink wine until I fell asleep.
Hmm.
So I think that was the main turning point. And it was a 6 month long period. I also think, because I believe in the genetic component of addiction,
Hmm.
that I think this is true. I tell my kids this all the time. If you have the gene and you put enough alcohol or drugs in, you're going to trigger it. So somewhere along the line, I triggered that too.
Hmm.
Uh, the drinking was, well, every time I tell this story, I'm like, because I used to, when I first got out of treatment, I'd be like, oh, the drinking was only bad for the last couple of years. But the longer I stay sober, which is 12 years now, the more I get, well, maybe it was 3 years, maybe it was 4 years, but
Hmm.
it was from those last 6 years, it gradually increased to where every day I had a drink, you
Gotcha.
know, every night I went to sleep with a drink. So I was a sipper, just like my dad, start
Hmm.
drinking in the afternoon, drink myself till I fell asleep. So,
I guess when you speak about drinking, is it the like do you resonate more with the action as it like the taboo of it versus like what it is that it did for you? Because the reason I asked the question is that I've seen this a couple of times kind of scrolling to Instagram like we were talking about earlier, and I think is from a psychologist that goes by Garber Gar I might be mispronouncing his name, but he seems to have like a really soft tone and with like the
mhm.
big caterpillar eyes. And one of the questions that he asks when people speak on addiction is like not why the addiction, but what is the pain that it's helping
Math.
solve?
Yeah.
Because it's either it could be masking it, but it's like it's doing. it's doing something because on the surface or from the outside looking in, for someone that doesn't know what's going on, they're either thinking, oh, my needs aren't being met, this isn't that. But did anyone at any point ever ask you, like, hey, are you okay? Or were you ever at a point to where you could tell somebody, there's a lot going on in life right now, and I know I'm supposed to be a social worker for all these
Mhm.
people, but like maybe I don't have my social worker. And then in order to keep up a face, it's like I've got to find the thing that's going to help like prop me up, so to speak.
Yeah, that's ex kind of exactly what it is. I mean, I was drinking to escape, to soothe, to medicate, quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
At first, it was a quick fix, and then it was, you know, to deal with the guilt and shame of using alcohol. It became kind of a vicious cycle. I did towards the last couple of years, like, okay, I love this. I tried to fix myself in every way besides giving up alcohol. I went back, I went to therapy. I've always been pro therapy. I've been in and out of therapy all my life. Um, well, since I became a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back to therapy. I had struggled with postpartum depression before. So I went to my doctor and was like, I need, antidepressants. And also I'm struggling with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So I went the whole route with trying to fix myself with medication, with tried to start running again. But the truth is, it doesn't work. Your coping mechanisms run out. And maybe that's a little bit why too I switched to alcohol. Because as a mom, I mean, I kept running
Mm-hmm.
for as long
Well,
as I could remember. That was
right.
one of my coping mechanisms.
You only have so much time when you're raising kids. If you're
Yeah,
running 3,200 meters in high school, middle school, college, like the less time you have, you can't just go for like hours and hours of running where you get the natural runner's high.
right. The
Like
high.
after a while, it's like, well, I started out in distance running as too. So whenever you said that, I kind of sparked up because it was like, okay, like, um, it almost felt like I was racing for it not to be last with a friend of mine in middle school and high school. But then after a while, my mechanics were kind of good to where they swapped me from like long distance to middle distance, running
Oh,
like
nice.
800 meters and the 300-meter hurdles. So it was like, okay, getting a little bit better, but trying to fully commit to something and not just be kind of like halfway in, halfway out, where it's like you do well in training, but then during the meet, I have maybe this thought in my head that's like, okay, well, don't wear yourself out. You're not gonna have to walk home, but you want to make it to the bus to get home, and you don't want to be like, oh no, I can't move. But it's like that never happened. But sometimes it's like you try to like maybe you tell yourself you're preserving greatness, or like if I don't give it my all, maybe I can't be cocky. But it's just like different little stories you tell yourself, either to not try or not wanting to look bad or not wanting like things expected
Yeah.
of you, where it's like, okay, it's good enough. And then maybe you get by with it. And it's like if I'm being paid attention to, good. If I'm not being paid attention to, that's also good. Like not too much time, because then it's like that's more demands and things being placed upon you.
Yeah. Did you ever feel guilty for doing really well? I mean, that's one of my traits. Like if I did really well, I was like, it was good. I had a
Right.
hard time saying I scored my best scores ever, or
Yeah.
best time ever.
I mean, I'd say, yeah, sometimes it's like a weird dynamic where it's I grew up as a preacher's kid, and one of the things where now it's I've tried to hang on to religion or my faith and try to figure out, okay, what is it that I can use going forward, and like what is it in some of my foundation that I can hang on to and kind of make it work in the world, and not just necessarily close my eyes and just be like, oh, I can't be vain, I can't be complimented, or just things of different sort, where it's like you see people act one way and they tell you one thing, so it's like, okay,
Hmm.
am I trying not to have a personality and just be kind of like do good, make good grades, go forward, or just like um like even having an understanding of what sin is and like how you deal with that, where it's something that like, okay, you missed the mark, but you have to keep trying and like you're going to continue missing the mark, but the only way that you get closer to hitting the bullseye, it's like you keep practicing. And then if it doesn't work, like sometimes you just got to stop and regroup, but not like seeing how other people failed and how they got dealt with versus like, oh yeah, I don't want the hammer coming down on me. It turns into things like, oh, like, well, if I make a bad grade, that that's just conveniently gonna disappear. Or like if I'm not being paid attention to here, okay, now I can kind of watch TV late. Like we're not watching TV Monday through Friday. Maybe you get like an hour on Saturday, but it's like, oh, like maybe I can sneak and watch a little bit of TV here. And like now I'm still technically like trying to binge watch a lot of cartoons and things I like never grew up with. But at the same time, I'm like, well, this really doesn't do anything for me. Either I'm going to fall asleep watching it or just be like, maybe I didn't miss all that much. And it's one of those where it's like, okay, well, you're an adult now, you're not a child. So you don't have to cope with things in the same way. But at the same time, when you find things, when I'm finding things that are taking me back to childhood, it's kind of a reminder of like, okay, like this reminds me of that, but I'm no longer there. So just like take a break, regroup, and try not to beat yourself up too much to where it's like, oh, I did it again. I'm messing up this or messing up that. And it's like, okay, well, there's only so many things you can control, and beating yourself up over things you can't control and trying to like make yourself as small as possible to where um people just pay less attention to you, but then at the same time it's like, yeah, they're not bothered with you, but then you're not actually bothered with yourself, and that brings on like that anxiety, the depression of like, okay, like if I'm not if I'm not a factor in this, like, oh, everybody else's life can go ahead. But then, like, if I am a factor and like things go well, great. But then, if what happens when things go bad, it's like you're never going to know until you try. But then, trying to like fix everything to fit perfectly, it hadn't worked. And I guess sometimes it's like just learning to make peace with doing what you can. And then at the
Mhm.
same time, just being like, maybe I just don't I I can't do that, or I need a break and I need to go do this. But then even if it's like a small thing, like making an effort to like communicate with someone else and saying like, hey, this is what's going on with me, because it's for me it's still a learning process where it's like, okay, I'm gonna attempt this and I might not get it right, but at least I'm gonna show up again to give it an effort rather than just like run away. This failed. Oh, everybody's going to think I'm a failure. They don't care. They're just like, oh, this is the worst of the worst, this, that, and the other. And it's like when you kind of step back at it, look at things online, whether it's like people are very extreme about this or extreme about that, it's like, it's all like entertainment. But then when it gets to real life, it's like, that's not how things work. Like you have the worst of the worst, the people that are like the true crime, the murderers, where they're like, lock them up, put them away. But
Mhm.
most people's lives don't just they don't operate in like the black and white where it's like you've got the golden child, the celebrities, and then you have like the criminals that are over here. It's like everybody kind of lives somewhere in between, and then
Mhm.
we all have like extreme opinions until it hits closer to home, and it's like, uh yeah, we're gonna do this, but we're not gonna publicize it. We're just gonna sweep this one under the rug. Just shh. Mum's the word. Don't tell anybody.
Exactly. Well, but you just described as a great example of like challenging those inner thoughts that may have come from your family of origin
Mhm.
that were given to you under good beliefs,
Mhm.
but in today's culture don't make sense. Like for me, it was don't tell anyone what's going on with that. Oh, here's a better one.
Mhm.
You can accomplish anything if you try hard enough. Well, I don't buy into that. I will, and certainly don't want to be president of the United States. I might want to learn how to fly a plane. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like, I can't accomplish everything. But to tell me as a kid, if you just work hard enough,
mm.
then when I try something, like I only got so far in athletics.
Yeah.
I never made All-American. So when I didn't make All-American, it's like, oh, I'm less than. Well,
Mm.
no, I went to college on an athletic scholarship. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
But I get stuck on the I didn't make All-American,
Right.
you know? Um, and so challenging those thoughts, because that's reflected over and over in our, oh my God, here's another a current day example. So I love speaking at social work and addiction conferences, and I got recently got my like reviews. People did submitted evaluations, and I got
Mm.
really good reviews. But in each of the courses I presented, it was obvious by some answers there was one or two people who just didn't connect with me. So what did I focus on? The one or two people.
Right.
I mean, I actually called my friend and I was like, someone didn't like me. And that again is a reflection of my childhood. It stirred up all those messages that aren't valid today. Because
Mm.
let's look at the whole package. You did fine. And the comments were great. And for that event, I brought my daughter with me. And if nothing else, the bond that we got from doing these workshops together, because I kind of pushed her into contributing and telling a little bit of our story about how our relationship was shattered by addiction and early recovery and how we came back together,
Hmm.
that people were like, I want to talk to her. I want to hear more from her.
Mm.
So regardless, it was a huge success. But no, I focus on the one or two people that didn't like me or
Gotcha.
didn't benefit. See, and even then, I'm projecting into they didn't like me.
Right.
Well, I'm sure they liked
But I mean,
something.
it's nice to see that you're able to separate from it a little bit more now, especially like reaching out to a friend and then you have somebody that you can kind of have that reflection with where they can be like, well, is this really real or is this something
Mhm.
that's it's coming from somewhere? Like it has a point of origin, but um it's not relevant right now.
Not relevant. It's not valid, which is, last month was Men's Mental Health Month. And I think this is much harder for men. And I'm raising three boys, and they've lived with a social worker mom all their life. So I try to get them to talk and express their feelings, but it's harder, I think, for men to say, I'm vulnerable, I need help, or I've been depressed for 2 weeks, or even just like, I'm overwhelmed, you
Yeah.
know?
Like
So,
one thing that I've found with that is that it's maybe easier to do through sport. Like I wrestled back in high school, and that's
mhm.
something that I did a little bit better than track and playing football. And like now recently found a gym doing jujitsu, and it's been about 2 months, but showing up on a weekly basis as many days as I can and making the effort to be there. And even recently, it's like, I guess I thought about it, but it didn't occur to me to actually like move forward and take the action and ask like, hey, do you mind if I get your phone number for people that I've met? Because it's
Oh,
like
that's fabulous.
for other activities, like I've been out of college now since 2013. So this is like almost 12 years come December, like
Mhm.
working full time in the career. And it's one of those things that they gave us, I think, two books. One of them I read, the other one still kind of collecting dust, but I'll get around to it eventually. It was Seven Habits of Highly Effective People and From Good to Great. But with the seven habits, the first thing was always it was talking about being proactive. And that was the thing where in doing this 2 year training program we had, part of the reason I wanted to do that was because it would get me out of my comfort zone where it's like, if I come home after work, I can jump on YouTube, have my computer, and just like catch up on TV shows like I was saying I've never seen before, or watch
Uh-huh.
reruns of King of the Hill and things like that. And I can do that and be comfortable. but also I can go like I did and join Toastmasters for the first time after hearing about it from someone, and then go to different clubs and things like that. Work
Hmm.
on taking the pauses instead of filling in all these filler words to be like, well, this, and it's like, okay, slow down, like from watching other people speak, and instead of like judging what they're doing, I'm like, I also do that. And maybe when I get feedback present day where it's like from people I don't really know, I'm like, man, you could say that a little mean, like maybe use the sandwich of like compliment, feedback, compliment. It's like,
Right.
but I was like, this isn't a Toastmasters thing, so remember where you are, take what you can, like maybe remove your emotions from it a little bit, and like don't let people like see you making a stink face over there. But long story, like to say, it's from going and doing those things and then being here in the new environment again and getting around people where I've gotten comfortable where it's like you're doing hand-to-hand combat where it's you're rolling around. Some people call it grappling, but it's like a
Mhm.
mix of wrestling from before, but now with submissions and strangulations and things like that, you learn what not to do. And then also someone pulls you to the side and they say like, oh, hey, like when you do this, here's a way to get out of it. And it feels like, okay, a week I'm just losing, but it's like I'm learning because I'm going to class and then we're doing live drills afterwards. And then even coming in on a Saturday like today, where it's more you go in and from like 9 to 11, the gym's open where you partner up with somebody and you try to go with someone different each round. Like I remember the first time that I went, the reason I'm telling the story is that I didn't feel the best, but without saying like, "Hey, I'm depressed. I'm not feeling good, this, that, and the other." Like
Uh-huh.
the first person that asked me, I said, "Hey, how's it going?" I was like, "I'm okay." And then the next person asked, and I was like, "Maybe I'll just be more honest." I'm like, "I'm so-so." And then he was like, "It's all right. Jiu-jitsu will fix it." And it's like in one of those things of like, obviously, when you have a chance to interact with others, especially for myself, um, doing things more physical for men, it feels like it's like a camaraderie that you build where
Mhm.
like you might not like somebody initially, but like seeing someone else go through the same pains that you're going through is like, okay, hey, I can look over and if this is kicking my butt, I see it kicking someone else's butt. So I don't feel like I'm as alone in this as something else. So it's like
Mhm.
it might not always take place like in a like over a therapy session or a sit down thing, but it is like an organized event where you're having an exchange and it's done in a respectful manner where you you learn from the people that you're with, and like the more time you spend with them, it's like they learn something about you, you learn something about them. And even one of the guys had mentioned that they're going to get together on Sunday, and I was like, okay, hey, I'd scheduled a bunch of podcasts to kind of get back into the swing of things, but I was like, if I can go for 30 minutes, at least say hello, see people outside of the gym, and just hang out for a little bit. There's no real agenda to it, but like building those um, little pockets of like consistency and something where it's like, hey, you come in, you touch base with people, and maybe we're sending memes in the group chat, but one on one, when something does come up, it feels more comforting to be like, okay, hey, I can talk to this person, or hey, I can call my mom, or I can call my brother, or just someone that I've kind of built a bond with. Or otherwise, it's like try, like just to your point, yeah, it is harder, but like doing physical activities has a way of making things a little bit better, where it's like at least the physicality of it takes away some of the stress where it distracts you a little bit, but then it makes things more manageable when you go back to them and it's like, okay, that's what I need to do. I one, two, three, maybe I go
Mhm.
by the store, grab something to eat, take a shower, go to sleep, try it again. Like repeat,
Yeah.
just kind of go anew with the new day.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm really big on in self-care is connection with other people. And you're getting a ton of connection that way that is evolving into, deeper, safer um, relationships.
Yeah.
So, which is one of the things that I encourage families to do too. And one of the things that especially for moms who don't have a father figure for their kids, I'm like, get involved in sports with them.
Mm.
As much as it might kill you, go out there and play a game of horse, you know, because that's you'll have a better chance of getting your child to talk to you
Yeah.
during a boy. I mean, maybe this is true for girls too,
Hmm.
because my only daughter is pretty athletic. But anyhow, with the boys, it was always like, let's go do something or whatever they're interested. It doesn't have to be sports. Like one of my sons is also very interested in music, and just when he was young, he would come. I looked over our piano.
Hmm.
Um, just by my coming and sitting with him while he's playing the piano, it soothes us both, you
Hmm.
know? It's a way to release some feelings,
Hmm.
like jujitsu. I'm not sure if I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
that.
You said it right.
And a way for me to support him and for him to see me, because it's very rare that I sit still.
Mm.
So for him to see me sit still and just listen, it's affirming, reassuring.
Nice.
But I think community is huge, and that's a huge part of mental health. So,
Yeah. I guess
yeah,
kind of going back to what you mentioned when you were choosing to go to recovery, but then it seemed like in order to choose recovery, you had to neglect your family. How did you how did you square that? And
that
um
is,
did
let me
that ever
interrupt.
change or
It took a long time for it to change. That was a mistake that I made.
gotcha.
My fear of rejection and abandonment. Well, first of all, I went to treatment 250 miles away from home. It was
Mm.
hard for my family to come up. But more part is that I didn't reach out to them. I was anxious about calling them. I wrote them superficial, safe letters. Um, again, all kids were involved in extracurricular activities. It was tough for them to come see me. And
Hmm.
I'd rather avoid the risk of back then, the
Hmm.
risk of rejection and dealing with the damage that would cause
Hmm.
than being rejected. And that was such a mistake, which is a big reason why I wrote the book too, because I think families who are impacted by addiction, when we go to family therapy, we have to tweak treatment, family therapy a little bit. And that's part of my mission is to try to get families more involved in treatment early on and to educate alcoholics and addicts like me
Hmm.
who so they don't make the same kind of mistakes that I made. I put up a wall and was very resistant to taking it down because on top of doing then 12 weeks of treatment, while I was getting better and dealing with some of these issues, my I was growing at a much faster pace than my family was growing. And there was hostility both from me,
Hmm.
frustration and hostility from a couple of my family members back to me. So when it came time for me to make a plan on leaving treatment, I went to a halfway house, which extended the separation, the physical separation, and enabled me to avoid, neglect, all of that again. It wasn't until I got kicked out of the halfway house at 6 months sober that
Hmm.
I woke up and realized because when you're kicked out of a halfway house, you can no longer maintain contact with anyone. It's like being shunned. So I lost my recovery family, except for my 12-step family, but I lost the majority of my social outlet.
Hmm.
Um, and I realized I couldn't go home. At the time, I was so afraid. My relationship was not great with my husband. And I went to treatment under the threat, I'm going to take the children away from you.
Hmm.
So I felt that was a real threat. So I couldn't go home and tell them I'd been kicked out of treatment, out of
Hmm.
a halfway house. By the way, I got kicked out for something I didn't do. It was very codependent, but I didn't drink. I got kicked out for kind of codependent behaviors.
Gotcha.
Um, and that's when I started making the change. I decided at that point, because I was still in therapy and all that, I decided to, well, I did, I mean, my story is this. I approached recovery from my codependency. I call that a codependency bottom or ACA bottom, because although I was sober, I was still emotionally miserable
What do
once
you
I
mean by that?
removed. Okay, so, like a lot of people drink or to cover up their feelings, their guilt, their shame, at least I did,
Hmm.
and to avoid neglect, to not have to deal with life.
Hmm.
Well, at that point, when I got kicked out of the facility, I realized I had been using the recovery tools, going to a meeting every day, reading, just immersing myself in recovery. That was my crutch, and I was using that to not
Hmm.
deal with my feelings.
Gotcha.
That makes sense?
Yeah. And I guess
So
is that something your did your counselors not challenge that, or like how did you feel they were
that's
doing pairing the counseling with the 12-step program?
well, I have to say there's a really long answer to that. The short answer is I had surrounded myself with people who told me what I wanted to hear.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
like my sponsors, my friends in the recovery program were like, I get it. I get why you don't want to talk to your kids. It's okay. You
Hmm.
have to focus on your recovery first. And in the 12-step community, in early sobriety, there's this huge pressure to put your sobriety above all else.
Hmm.
And the book is about that too, is balancing that out, how to make your family part of your recovery system.
Gotcha.
But so I was doing all along, my therapist was like, okay, I think we should be dealing with this. Okay, okay. But a good therapist just plants the seed and waits for you to be miserable enough to want to do it.
Hmm.
So that's that's when I wanted to do it. I went back to therapy. I looked at the underlying childhood issues, the inner child issues that were impacting
Hmm.
my relationships today. And let me back up. In those 6 months, I created a phenomenal foundation of sobriety skills. I've never relapsed. I've never come close.
Hmm.
I have. So there's purpose in that. There's a purpose of immersing yourself and developing those skills. I just wish I'd done it better. Um, so we started looking at that inner child work.
Hmm.
I started risking rejection and risking connecting with my kids. Also, I was at a halfway house. So I went to a different sober living environment, which was not as restrictive.
Hmm.
And I could go home and visit when I wanted to. Prior to that, you can leave the halfway house without, you know, a 14-day plan ahead of time and things like that, which made it tough. Not that that's an excuse, but it was harder.
Gotcha.
Getting kicked out enabled me to take a little more charge, take some risk. And I proceeded to repair those relationships just like any good social worker would. I made an assessment, a
Hmm.
plan. I supplemented some skills. What worked, I continued on. What didn't work, you toss. I found that each kid is different. I found that I had to really get information from a lot of different sources. One of my favorite things that I did is my treatment program, the last 10 weeks of my treatment program, I lived with 20 other women in a cottage. And so you develop close relationships with at least some of them. And a lot of them are moms. And one of my closest friends, Kim, had two boys that were about the ages of my youngest boy. So I went and like interviewed them and talked to them. I was like, because she had I'm sure she damaged her relationships, but it had never completely split. So I interviewed kids. I talked to the young people at the AA meetings because I had 20 and 21-year-olds, so that I'd be like, what do you wish you could have got from your parents?
Hmm.
And then I poured that all into initially public speaking and talking to people and volunteering and starting to do some 12-step conferences and things. And then it evolved into a book because I'm
Gotcha.
just so passionate about it. It's come full circle. As a kid, I wanted to do better by my children than my parents had done by me.
Hmm.
I'm doing better by my children than my parents did by me. And one of the ways that I counsel other parents who are struggle with the guilt and shame, like I did about making those mistakes and the damage we did,
Hmm.
is that And definitely, I damaged and I hurt my kids. I mentally and emotionally abused them. I'm not proud of that, but I have to say that so other people can say it too.
Mm,
Today, I have relationships with them that you I would have never dreamed of. I grew up in a home where I was afraid of my mom.
mm,
I never learned how to have healthy relationships. I never learned how to solve conflicts. I just learned how to obey. And I'm teaching those things to my kids now. And my kids, although I put them through a very difficult time, for a good year and a half while I was
mhm.
figuring it out, because it took another solid year after that 6 month period for me to start seeing changes, for them to start actually seeing changes in me too.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm getting long-winded, but that's what my passion is all about, is breaking those patterns of generational dysfunction that was
Gotcha.
passed down. Because my parents, again, always have to say this because some of my parents, family members, and some of my cousins and stuff hear this. My parents did a better job than their parents did.
Mm,
My parents really, they provided well for us, but they also imparted some tools and beliefs that don't didn't serve me well.
gotcha.
So I'm trying to change that with my kids. And I think, oh, the bottom line is this. So my kids have seen me go from like the worst of the worst to doing what I'm doing now, writing a book, overcoming my insecurities,
Mhm.
risking rejection by being on podcast and people not liking me. And that's the biggest lesson I can give them of all. You can overcome. So
Gotcha.
sorry, I got on
No,
a soapbox.
you're good. I think one of the things that I was curious about is like in going through going through trying to become sober, going through those steps, or even like just going through life, like becoming a parent, like getting out from under your parents, and like did you start to see things where it's like, okay, like I can understand how my parents got to here? Because sometimes like I have conversations with my brother and sometimes I'm conflicted where I'm like, I hear what you're saying, where it's like everyone has to own their things, where it's, and in the one hand, it's, you can say, parents were terrible, I'm going to outdo them. And then you can kind of work yourself to the bone trying to be so much better than your parents, where it's like you either don't see the good or you don't see like the humanity of their life. And you're like, well, I'm going to be superhuman to that. If anybody looks, they can be like, oh, like you were a superstar and then they were down there doing whatever. And it's like that, like a lot of times life just doesn't work like that. And sometimes it's almost like you can be working against yourself where it's like they they lived the life that they lived and the time that they lived it with the
Right.
kids that they lived it, and it's like they were different people and they have different households at each stage that everyone was there, because it's like trying to raise a child now may be vastly different from when you were a child, and it's like also the tools that are available to you may make some things easier where funny example, my I don't have children myself, or I haven't had to do this, but I would imagine it's preferable to have disposable diapers versus cloth diapers, where it's
Uh-huh.
like I think I was visiting with a friend and maybe like their parent was kind of bragging a little bit like, oh, back in my day we used to have to wash the cloth, and then when they're holding their grandbaby and it's like time to change them, they're like, yeah, no more about this back in my day thing. Like, give me that, give me that diaper. Let me change this and throw this away. I don't know what this baby's doing, but we're not doing that. We're not doing
Yeah.
that in this year. It's like those times have come and gone. Like, yeah, we had the good, we had the bad and the in between, but it is good to see times kind of evolve a little bit and just,
Right.
I mean, some things are nostalgic for those reasons, but you can't bring the past back.
Yeah. Well, and a big part of healing too for me was making peace with my parents,
Mm,
and understanding that they were flawed too. They did the best they could. And that's a big part of, for those who work in adult child of alcoholics program, it's a 12-step program based on the same 12 steps. And there's an inventory phase. And the whole part of that is that to understand where you came from, not to blame your parents. I'm not blaming my parents because, my God, we had food on the table. They went through some really big hardships. And for the most part, because the rule is we don't get to talk about it, I didn't
mm,
learn about those hardships till I went away to college and there was no money for college because they had spent our,
mm.
college money on surviving for anyhow. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
Making peace with your parents as part of becoming emotionally healthy and emotionally intelligent. And I think that's like, well, that's a whole nother conversation. I feel very invested in
mm,
understanding where you come from in terms of helping prevent relapse. I think a lot of people, that's a whole nother subject, but and I'm doing some research on that. Relapse prevention.
gotcha.
Well, and actually I do a presentation on it. Why do people relapse after having 1, 2, or 10 years of recovery? You think, and then there's a number of practical reasons, but I think a big part of the reason is that you haven't dealt with those childhood wounds
Mm,
and made peace with your parents and understood that. I'm jumping off track a lot,
gotcha.
but
Well,
but the bottom line, you started out with like understanding your
mhm.
parents and where they came from, and we're not blaming them. We're just learning. I mean, I hear you talk a lot about self-awareness, which is great. That's what it takes.
Well, sometimes it feels ironic because it's like you can talk about it 1 minute, but then you like go off to do something else, and it's almost like the self-awareness just kind of took a break. It like stayed in the seat while I just like walk out the door. But one thing I was curious about is, um, was it more difficult or was it any different making peace with your parents versus like making peace with your kids after the fact? Like,
Oh,
did
wow.
did one come before the other?
That's a great question. I think I made peace with my parents way before I made peace with my kids.
Mm,
Because part of my grief, my dad died in 2008, and part of my grief over that, and I had a decent relationship with my dad, was that I hadn't made peace with um, his failing health, his Alzheimer's in the
mm,
last years of his life. And I hadn't given closure to like shared with him how important he was and stuff to me. And I learned through that process, that's when I started drinking. But I also learned with that process, I wasn't going to let that happen between me and my mom.
mm,
I was not going to let her get sick and die and me kill myself over again. And that was a big part of my process of accepting her for who she was. I
mm.
still had that like psychology, social work background. You know what I
Right.
mean? That information was there. I just had to start applying it again, which is sad, but
I
it is
guess
what
like,
it is.
but even to that point where it's like, I guess it's hard not to be hard on ourselves because sometimes it's like maybe it feels like you're getting away with something you're not supposed to get away with, where it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I have these skills, I should know this, so to speak, where it's like even being a year out of college doing um I studied in like civil engineering, focused more on structural, but like not spending a year and a half running calculations where it's like, hey, we use this software, we did like 9 pages of calculations and I could do this and the other like from muscle memory, not necessarily wanting to memorize it, but
Uh,
spending a year out in the construction field working more on logistics and getting material to the site, traveling a little bit, like basically not trying to work after school, just being like, yeah, I don't want to have nightmares about a test I missed, this, that, and the other. And then
uh,
fast forward, go to an office, and then I'm almost panicking where it's like, I don't remember this. But then my senior supervisor is giving me like subtle hints of encouragement of like, hey, we know you can do this. Just take your time with it. you went to a good school, you have good marks on everything that you've done before. Like
Um,
people have spoken well of you, but then there's that voice in the back of my head to be like, I'm only hearing this because I'm gonna get run off like at this, or like just starting making this mountain out of a molehill of like, if I don't get this perfect, like uh, I'm not gonna figure it out. And then just realizing that, hey, you're hired to do the job, but you're allowed to learn on the job, like open your book, reread things that, yeah, you read it 5 years ago, or it took you this time to get the degree, but just because you got the degree in the background doesn't mean that you're a sponge like osmosis where you just remember everything. It's like literally
yeah.
you don't do something for a year, for 6 months, it's like gone. But then once you start looking back at it and allowing yourself to say, okay, I'm gonna try this for an hour. If I don't make headway, I'm gonna go ask someone, hey, how would you do this? And then maybe they give you an approach or they like challenge you to look at it different. And it feels like you're being tortured or tormented, but it's like, no, like go take a walk, like try again, like try a different problem. If this one's got you stuck, it's like you're trying to work your way through a test, but like trying to remember the um this is what I'm supposed to do versus like this is what I can do to get to that point. I think sometimes it's challenging where it's like you like it's so much easier to give somebody else the benefit of the doubt than yourself to be like, oh, okay, well, I'll eventually do this given like a timeline. I'm not saying I'll eventually do it, like I'll get to it forever ago, but then I've got a deadline tomorrow. But
Mhm.
then it's like, okay, with proper parameters, like things can get done, but sometimes it just feels so daunting at the beginning where it's well, like oh, other people are just like, well, I see the letters behind your name, or I see you've got this over there, and I see that, and it's like you don't really know what you see. So it's like whoever you are, whatever voice you are, like calm down, take a seat. You're hanging out in the stands, watch what you want to watch, talk what you want to talk, but like I'm the man in the arena. Let me do my thing. And then if you like it, cool. If you don't, get your popcorn, go home, move on to the next. Like there's plenty of shows to see around here. But
Yeah.
I definitely identify with you there.
Well, and you just mentioned so many powerful stories, but the thing that I wrote down as you said it was muscle memory. I thought that's a great analogy because I talk a little bit about the brain science of addiction and how we're driven by our primitive brain and the messages that we learned that we've imprinted, like from like I don't know if this statement is correct, but I read somewhere and wrote about emotional intelligence is like developed before the age of 5. So if you're in a harsh, critical environment and the messages to you are question, you're not good enough, that's that old muscle memory that's going to pop up when you're challenged.
And you
So
said before the age of 5?
it's 5 or 7 or something like that. And I'm not sure if
Wow.
it's emotional intelligence or personality.
Well, that
Um,
that makes a lot of sense when you like mentioned the little kid and you start thinking like, okay, like at the time as far back as I can remember, like what were the messages fed to me, and it's like, wow, that's still in there. Like, hmm,
it is, I promise you. And there's a lot of research about pre-verbal messages, things that happen. So like Gabor Mate talks about how at 6 months.
that's his name. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So at 6 months, and I'm not sure if I got the story exactly right, that he was separated from his family for his safety.
Hmm.
So even though he doesn't consciously remember that, or let's say theoretically, if you're
Hmm.
separated from your family, you're still going to have that wound of abandonment.
Hmm.
And you're pre-verbal, but it's there and it could haunt your future relationships, your future fears about moving over and over again, or being removed from your family. That wound is there. And unless you build the awareness
Hmm.
about it and examine it, it's gonna haunt your current behaviors, theoretically. But
Gotcha.
I believe that to be true. There's also a lot of really interesting research about epigenetics.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with epigenetics? Whereas
I've heard
trauma,
the term before. I'm not sure
yeah,
if I know exactly what it is.
well, trauma can be passed down genetically from one generation to another. So, Holocaust victims
Hmm.
who survived came to America. They're, again, theoretical. I've read a study, but I can't find it at the moment.
Hmm.
Their children are more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, things like that. Because the idea is that the coping mechanisms that the survivors had to use,
Hmm.
they don't genetically change the genes, but they encourage different aspects of the genes to become more proactive, like more
Yeah.
anxious.
So
And
like
that,
they use what they use to cope, they use that in the raising of their children, which is what's the transferring of.
yeah. Well, and part of it's behavioral and socially, but part of it is genetically, is
Gotcha.
genetic. So I'm not great at explaining it. On one of my blogs, I have two little about generational trauma, two little video clips, which I
Hmm.
think explain it really nicely. But to me, it's just fascinating. And it helps explain things like when I get really frustrated with myself. In fact, I'm working on a blog series about shame. I still carry some pieces of shame,
Hmm.
frustration. I'm annoyed that they pop up in my relationships, my self-doubt, and things like that. I've addressed it in therapy and in behavior modification a ton of different ways. The next step for me is going to be a therapeutic tool called EMDR, to help address some of that unresolved trauma that's triggering the shame. Does that make sense?
A
So
little
I
bit.
don't know why that hangs on so deeply. It
Hmm.
could be, I know my mom was deeply insecure. I don't know a lot about my grandmother, but again, she was a daughter raised in a farming family, wasn't encouraged. I don't even know if she finished high school.
Right.
Got married at 19, yada, yada, yada. But had a husband who abandoned her, moved back to Norway for a while. And, so some of that trauma obviously is passed down. Before
Hmm.
my mom died, I learned that she'd been sexually assaulted twice. Never heard about that before.
Hmm.
So maybe some of that anxiety about, and I'm not talking sex, but intimate relationships, being willing to be completely vulnerable with another person
Hmm.
was passed down to me. Maybe that's part of it. And, the shame, I don't know. We'll find out. Talk to me in 6 months and I'll tell you what I learned from EMDR.
Gotcha.
So,
I guess one thing I got from a another like a family friend, um she works with parents like um parents and their kids doing family therapy, and one of the books that she shared with me was called The Power of Ted, and
uh-huh.
it spoke on these two triangles essentially, where it's like you have the victim triangle and you have the victor triangle. And sometimes when I guess there's a lot of things I don't know anything about, but like anything that kind of like makes the lights go off in my head, where it's like the victim triangle, or things where it's like, okay, you become a victim because of a circumstance that's out of your control. And then
Hmm.
there's either something or someone that's the perpetrator, and then something that like validates the victimhood to say that, oh yeah, that person is blaming that. So sometimes it's like you could be told, hey, we have generational this, that, and the other. And it's like if the story never changes, you continue to reinforce that story. And it's like, unless you become the person that changes the way that you view the story, it's like it's not going to make it less real. And I'm not saying you just lie to yourself to be like, oh, hey, this happened, but no big deal. But it's like doing something actively to, like therapy, coaching, to get you to, okay, this happened. How can I deal with that to learn from it and not be found in the same state, where it's like, okay, maybe I have people in my circle that go against that, not necessarily giving it more fuel, not putting
Mhm.
more fuel to the fire. Because I think sometimes it's like, I think you've done a good job of distinguishing like where you come from, like where your background is and things that you still have to find out about versus like what you had to do differently to like break the cycle and to see, okay, well, here's what I received, but here's what I was able to give. And then maybe here's what I got back. And then part of the motivation for that is like, okay, I'm going to share my story, be vulnerable, risk rejection, write a book, do podcasts, and share these things so that it's like, okay, I can either risk being wrong, but actually get that out there to where I can get some feedback where somebody can say they identify with it, or they can tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But then I get to choose what to do with that information. Either this is more of the same, so I go a different direction, or this is getting me closer to my goal. And then I can use that to actually build what it is that I'm working towards. So it's like, okay, I'm no longer like just stuck here. It's like, hey, I now know how to um, deal. I know how to speak to children that have had parents that dealt with alcoholism to say, hey, I speak from a place of experience. Not only I was the kid, but I was also the parent. And then here's how I dealt with my parents, and here's how my children have dealt with me. And it's like,
Mhm.
I would think, unless it's just not something you're wanting to hear, there's something of value there to be like, okay, like there's someone that was vulnerable enough to share what happened to her and how she went through it and what worked, what didn't, everything in between. And I get different perspectives because like the only other person that I've talked to that kind of introduced themselves as an alcoholic and as an alcoholic, I was like, it kind of took me back for a second, but I was like, okay, like explain that. And the more he explained it, I was like, oh, okay, like I couldn't necessarily relate initially, but then the more we talked about it, there were different touch points where it's like, oh, okay, like it kind of comes down to pain points. Like, what is it that this does? What is it like what's being masked or like what's being treated? And then it's like, okay, if the treatment is working, even if it doesn't look like it, it's like maybe you find a different addiction or a different thing that like is more life-giving than just something that puts you in a worse space and then like isolates you from the people that you love and vice versa.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. You summed that up beautifully.
Thank you.
The process of healing and putting it in perspective and yeah, and taking a look what works for you here and what doesn't. And
Well,
so that's why I share my story so openly because like brain science, I understand the science of addiction. It's hard for me to describe how the amygdala and the hypothalamus and all that, but I can tell you that when I am threatened or hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, that I
mhm.
am more susceptible. And my primitive brain is like, you got to, is survival mode, survival mode. And I can explain how that happens in my life
Yeah.
more easier by telling my story.
Yeah, and it was Mrs. Graby, and I think one of the things that she added to that HALT's acronym was success. Also, when you're successful, it's like you have to watch out for what comes as well, because sometimes you have people that kind of go from being on a high and then all of a sudden they feel like they're depressed, where it's like, hey, I got the thing I wanted, like why am I sad all of a sudden? And it's
Mhm.
one of those things where it may just be an emotion that you need to go through and not try to fight it to be like, I shouldn't be sad. I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't. It's like, okay, hey, I'm feeling this. I get to like just watch myself be in this moment and not feel like I've got to have like an immediate fix to
Right.
stop everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's absolutely okay to take a rest or to be depressed about it. I mean, when the book actually came out, I thought about that. Yeah, maybe I avoided some of the feelings because I threw myself into like working more on social media and the blog and things like that, but so I can continue the writing part. But I think that's really common. I wrote that too, that success can be a huge trigger, you
Mm,
know? I mean, I've heard lots of people say that about when they get married,
mm.
there's all this pressure up to a wedding. And then after the wedding, you're like, what do we do now? You know, oh, the party is over, or after a party or a promotion. So I think that's really true. And I always, my therapist says, and again, don't know if it's true, that like crying has a natural antidepressant to it, and then our
Mhm.
tears, you
I've
know,
heard that.
yeah, I think walking through those emotions are important and not to deny that you're sad, depressed, scared, because those are basic human emotions that come from our primitive brain that help us survive.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
20,000 years ago, uh, a boar or wild animals running at you, you need to get into fight or flight.
Yeah.
That was a purposeful tool. But now when you see your boss walking up towards you with an angry look on her face, fight or flight doesn't necessarily feel appropriate, but be like, okay, and I'm feeling anxious. I'll say to my boss, like, I can see a look on your face. Did I do something wrong?
Yeah.
Or is there something I can help you with? I mean, I've learned
Hmm.
through practice to do that, but still the primitive that, response is like,
Right. Right. I
so
agree with that. I
yeah,
guess do you have a copy of your book on you, or can you tell
I,
people a little bit more about it?
I will. And I'm sorry. I'm just so darn proud of it. It is called Rebuilding Relationships and Recovery, subtitle How to Connect with Family and Close Friends After Alcoholism and Addiction. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all bookstores, both online and in person. It is an easy read. I approached it like, what did I miss out on when I got sober?
Mm.
What do I wish I would have known and learned? It is also, although it's written directly to the addict or alcoholic, it's also great for family members. If you know someone, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback from the wives or husbands, partners of addicts and alcoholics, because there's a lot of affirmation here. There's a little tough love, like, one of the things I preach is balance. You've got to include your family. You've got to recognize
Hmm.
that your family is in crisis too, which is a trait that we as alcoholics, I could get on a soapbox and tell you all the things that we do wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, so those are listed in here, but also with a lot of helpful tools, a little bit of information about the brain science
Hmm.
so that you can understand, and especially family members can understand how we're so susceptible to relapse in that first year of sobriety till our brain heals.
Hmm.
Um, there's a chapter on grief, on surrender. It's a good book. It's got lots of tools. It's one of those things that you'll pick it up, read it, come back to it, will settle in. So,
Gotcha.
yeah,
It
yeah,
kind of reminds me of a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, and one of the first things that it highlights in there is that, hey, we're gonna have recovering nice guy uh action items. You have like an action within each chapter and at the end of each
yeah,
chapter. And at the very beginning, it tells you that you need to find safe people to communicate with, but also you need to let your partner, let your significant other, let the people around you know what you're doing so that all of a sudden it's not like you're going one way and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going this way. And it's like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah,
we didn't
yeah,
agree to this. Like, you just trying to become this whole new person. It's like, I don't like it.
exactly. And yeah. I don't think people realize that the that early sobriety can do as much damage to relationships as active addiction.
Hmm.
And the family members will say, yes, it does. My partner came home and they're an entirely different person. I don't understand them. They're just as crazy and erratic as ever because this new recovery behavior looks odd.
Hmm.
Um, So again, I lost my train of thought. I mean, it's awareness, understanding, learning, that kind of thing. And yeah, I lost
Gotcha.
my train of thought. But
Sorry about that.
no, no,
Do you plan
no.
do you plan to do a like a reading of it for like Audible or
There is a reading. Yeah, it is on Audible. I did not
okay,
read it.
gotcha.
The publisher thankfully hired, and I got to select among several people a voice that kind of was like mine, a little melodramatic, not as melodramatic as me, but who I could hear in their voice. They understood where I was
Mhm.
coming from. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, pick it up on Audible.
Nice.
Um, yeah, and let me just throw out here too. So I have a blog.
Mhm.
It's oh my God, I'm blanking on, but it's at my website, which is janicejonsondowd.com. And
Mhm.
I'm on Instagram, parenting_NIN, the word N underscore recovery. And I just started a TikTok that's called Recovering Relationships. And my daughter and I, because I like a lot of projects and I'm essentially semi-retired except for books and all the and speaking. My
Mhm.
daughter and I also started a podcast where we share our experience about repairing relationships. I have to say this, the book is not just about parent-child relationships. It's about husbands, wives, making peace with your parents, neighbors, estranged, close friends that you've lost touch with. It's a good, just in general, relationship book,
Gotcha.
even
I
if
like it.
addiction isn't the primary problem. So,
That's true. I guess sometimes you never know what gems you can find from different places.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and okay. One more little sales pitch is that it's based on my research that I did in my own personal research, repairing my relationships, but on my personal experience as a recovering alcoholic, and then my social work experience.
Mm.
So, and then I'm writing a follow-up book that is parenting and recovery, which
Okay.
won't come out till next year because I've gotten so invested in teaching events. So,
Gotcha. I like it.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'd like to ask you one more question for
Okay.
from the first question that I asked you. Are you still who you said you were?
Oh, a mom, a recovering alcoholic, that person?
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I'm one of those people that my recovery's got to come first, and then my family. I still struggle with putting my own personal needs up there, but I say that I am a recovering alcoholic. To maintain my sobriety, I pay attention to my physical, spiritual, mental, and social health, and my family is a big part of my social health. So, yes, I'm a mother of 4 kids, a grandmother, now ex-wife, um, and semi-retired. I am all those things. It is how I identify, and my goal is to help families repair relationships, and for you guys not to do what I did, shorten the time. Okay, one point. So it took me a year and a half before I saw any significant improvement with any of my 4 children.
Hmm.
It took me 4 years. I think if I would have started that process from week 3 of treatment, I could have skipped a whole year and my relationships could have begun improving immediately, or at
Mm.
least stabilized instead of getting worse. So my overall message for anyone who listened to this is don't give up hope. Keep
Hmm.
trying. I love what you shared earlier about problem solving. You tried this, you tried that when you're talking about your job. I
Hmm.
mean, that's exactly, you use those same tools with repairing relationships.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think with that, we'll leave it there and see what the people say and then circle back.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think that's a great stopping point.
You're very welcome.